Here's what's going on right now on the world stage. Some of the most powerful leaders of Western democracies are at this emergency NATO summit meeting. It's a show of forced unity and concern against how Vladimir Putin continues to run these attacks and this war against Ukraine. This realignment against Russia, in many ways, was avoidable. It's wrought by Putin's decision to launch a war that's now killed thousands and displaced over 3 million. This is a war that Putin started. That's a fact. Many experts say that while the Ukrainian resistance continues to be effective, the ending of this war will likely be up to Putin in many ways. And that brings us to our special report for you right now. We recently charted Ukrainian President Zelensky's unusual path to power and how that created a framework for him to then lead this resistance in ways that have caught many by surprise, as one of our guests remarked on earlier tonight. Now we turn to a report on the making of Vladimir Putin, a very different man and a different adversary, a man who much of the Western world still is struggling to understand and constrain as he leads this largest land war in Europe since World War II. This reporting, which draws on many different sources, this collective understanding of this man, it matters. Sadly, it is a matter of security and an existential issue for so many in the region. Putin is an authoritarian. His reign has now spanned 5 U.S. presidents. So, to understand where he began, he first took power in 2000, tapped by Kremlin insiders to replace Boris Yeltsin after Putin's own 16 years of service as a KGB agent.
Not long ago, I had about a 20-minute phone conversation with President Boris Yeltsin, who today ends his historic tenure as Russia's democratically elected president.
In Moscow, preliminary results of the presidential elections have been announced. According to the data from the Central Election Commission, Vladimir Putin has been elected president of Russia.
Putin deployed his own government background and relationships to actually get installed as Yeltsin's successor, which allowed him to then run for the results you just saw as kind of a new incumbent with connected insiders and forces behind Putin, who immediately used the power of official state TV to enhance his profile, aiming to win him more than 50% of the votes cast. As the Times reported, that was before the 2000 election. Putin came up decidedly through that old system. And any ways that he has updated Russian governing has typically focused on modernizing authoritarian tactics for the new age we live in, not to share power or freedom or engage meaningfully in democracy. Stalin infamously purged and killed people and then would literally have the state photographs doctored to make it as if they never existed. Photography itself a kind of information weapon. Putin deploys more modern propaganda, from the cyber meddling and online influence campaigns that occurred in the United States that we may all remember from 2016 and in Europe right now, to carefully staged propaganda and grandiose images that try to cast Russia and thus Putin as still a piece of some kind of Soviet-era dominant power. That's why Putin experts say he invests so much in these grand international events, you may recall, because they both enhance his perceived power and try to launder and cover for his authoritarianism. It's widely reported that Putin obsessed over getting the 2014 Olympics to Russia, even claiming that he would end Russian attacks on civil rights and censorship to get his much-needed international approval. Those were actually the most expensive games to date, $50 billion and counting, and he terrorized staff to pull it off. One project manager fled the country after being fired and being warned of retribution by Putin. That manager later said he was poisoned with mercury. Now, Putin got those Olympics. In fact, he was back at it, making a bid to host the 2020 World Expo, a pitch so important, again, because he clearly cares about some of the world's opinions, that this is one of the only times Mr. Putin's ever been seen speaking English in public.
Russia has a long and rich experience of participation in the World Expo movement. We proudly submit our bid to host World Expo 2020 in Yekaterinburg.
That's how bad he wanted. That was years out. You can see him laboring to make the case in English, and it did not work. The expo went to the UAE. Just as Putin sought the image and luster of international credibility to try to blunt any edges of his actual autocratic moves, he has constantly tried to get American presidents to see him and treat him as something other than a dictator and adversary.
It's very important for the future that we continue to work together.
He just laid out a vision. I think it's very sincere. I think it's innovative. I think it's strategic.
We had excellent discussions with the President yesterday. I am aware of not only the extraordinary work that you've done on behalf of the Russian people.
We've had great meetings. We have a very, very good relationship.
Donald Trump's warmth towards Putin is well known, and it may be complicated, as we've reported. But what's actually telling about Putin's abilities is that all of this predates Donald Trump's unusual presidency. The ex-KGB officer has proven pretty effective at personal diplomacy, given the hand he's playing. He even drew one of the perhaps most odd compliments an American president has ever given any Russian leader when George W. Bush talked about Putin's soul, which was later mocked by Hillary Clinton.
I found it to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country.
This is the president that looked in the soul of Putin, and I could have told him he was a KGB agent. By definition, he doesn't have a soul. I mean, this is a waste of time, right?
A waste of time, but one that the United States and its diplomats have to contend with. Putin has also found ways to try to play administrations off each other. He does not practice democracy at home, but he has some understanding of the politics of a democracy. By the time Obama tapped Clinton as his Secretary of State, she was trying her own version of Russian outreach, meeting with Putin's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, to present, remember this, a giant reset button that was supposed to symbolize a jumpstart and reset for these two countries' relationship.
We want to reset our relationship. And
Let's do it together.
so we will do it together, okay?
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
That's the warmth of diplomacy. Many diplomats try it. We should note the diplomat you see there on the Russian side, though, Lavrov, is the same one Trump would later host in the Oval Office after firing James Comey over the Russia probe. So things got even trickier. Lavrov's still in that post today, pushing Putin's global agenda. As for Clinton, well, she concluded Putin was getting more out of those types of gestures than the United States. And by 2013, she says she was counseling Obama against flattering Putin with high-level attention. Decline his invitation for a presidential summit, she said. It was 2 years later that President Obama's hardcore glare at Putin at a UN meeting got some notice around the world. Many nations were soon glaring at Russia when it made that first incursion into Ukraine, which was a year later, a year after that photo with Obama in 2014. The Times reported how Putin reclaimed Crimea for Russia and bitterly denounced the West along the way. Now, that move was not a full-scale war to formally topple a government, but it was a new line crossed. It showed what Putin was doing, feeling strong, unchallenged at home, and bent on defying even the appeals to his own interests from a much more powerful country, the United States. As Obama put it, why disrupt Ukraine when doing so would mean Western sanctions? There's no single confirmed answer, only the reality that those partial sanctions back then did not slow Putin down. Today is different. He faces crippling, massive, enduring sanctions for what is a full-scale war. Another answer to the question of what Putin was thinking then and now is that his strategy is to take great risks or costs because he is hell-bent on a Russian resurgence. He's long viewed the Soviet collapse as a kind of tragedy. He called it the geopolitical catastrophe of the century. And he's pushed the idea that Russia must counter the West, and specifically NATO, which he claims he views as a provocation that's outlasted its Cold War-era use. So that's another answer if you think this is all consistent foreign policy. A third possibility is that Putin thinks Ukraine must just be a part of Russia, that this is Ukraine-specific. Last year, he wrote an essay asserting true sovereignty of Ukraine is possible only in partnership with Russia. We are one people. That's kind of like how he once claimed that his rule of Russia would follow a path away from harmful communism and towards being, well, something that he lies about, towards being, he claimed, a democracy.
Only an effective and democratic state can uphold civic, political, and economic freedoms. We have developed a democratic political system. The multi-party system is a reality now. Russians can elect their president, the deputies of the State Duma, governors, and local governments.
A younger Putin claiming that it's a democracy, trying to argue that in key ways Russia is like the West. But Putin's Russia only has the trick and trappings of a fake democracy as a shell around his dictatorship. In 2020, Putin gave himself a path to stay in power another 14 years. He unilaterally canceled any limits in the Constitution. That was 2 years after he publicly said he would not do that. This is what his authoritarianism looks like, and it creates a loop of repression and disinformation and confusion that strengthens the power of the autocrat. So Putin can create the perception today that initially, when the internet first burst on the scene, might have seemed like a difficult task. How would you get people to think your dictatorship's a democracy or the war you started isn't even happening? But of course, as you may have noticed from some of the coverage in the last month, Vladimir Putin censors huge parts of the internet. He suppresses criticism and war coverage to the point that many Russians do incorrectly think there is no aggressive or unilateral war that Russia started in Ukraine. For many experts who've charted Putin over the years, it's clear that sometimes he will talk directly about his goals. I quoted some of his writings, for example, about Ukraine. That other times he lies. And the difficulty will be figuring out what he is up to at any given time.
We democratized our election system in a serious manner.
I will continue to work actively, openly, and honestly.
If you're weak, there will be always someone who would like to come over or fly over.
We must look to the future of our great motherland strategically.
I don't think the Ukrainian people is in any way unfriendly. No, we are one single entity. Now, the leadership of Ukraine, that's an altogether different matter.
You take it all in from where he started and all the different things he says, claims, and does. And the bad news is how devastating Putin's goals are and how effective he has been over the years as he's accrued even more power and dealt with other leaders in countries that are stronger than him militarily and economically. On the other hand, you take it all together, and experts say there are some constructive points here because this is a person who does respond to some of the world's stated values, who does respond to external pressure, who has felt the need to at least claim that he follows democracy even when he doesn't, or that he'll stop censoring even when he won't. So something worked there up to a point. This is a person subject to self-interest, and that can be used against him, perhaps not only for the benefit of Ukraine, but for the benefit of many people stuck being ruled by Vladimir Putin inside Russia as well.